Donald Trump has a message for farming and agriculture manufacturer John Deere.
Behind me, John Deere tractors. I know a lot about John Deere. I love the company. But as you know, they've announced a few days ago that they're going to move a lot of their manufacturing business to Mexico. I'm just notifying John Deere right now. If you do that, we're putting a 200% tariff on everything that you want to sell into the United States, so that if I win, John Deere is going to be paying a 200%. They haven't started it yet. Maybe they haven't even made the final decision yet, but I think they have. John Deere is going to, and anybody else that does this, because it's hurting our farmers, it's hurting our manufacturing. And if you do that, you're going to have a 200% tariff put on the product that you make in Mexico, right across the border.
In 2018, Donald Trump signed the United States-Mexico-Canada trade agreement, and it took effect in 2020. The new USMCA, that's what it's called for short, took the place of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, which was signed in 1992 and took effect in 1994. Now, this new USMCA reconstituted the terms of trade between the three nations on the North American continent: Canada, United States, and Mexico. And we have to understand the difference between these two trade agreements, which are roughly about 5 key things, in order to understand what the problem is with what Trump is saying to John Deere here, and to get an understanding that John Deere is only following the rules that Donald Trump and his administration has laid out. I provided those 5 key differences for you here. So let's walk through these really quickly. So under NAFTA, 62.5% of automotive parts had to be produced in-house. Now, John Deere produces tractors as well as riding lawnmowers. Those things are considered automotive parts under the North American Free Trade Agreement as well as the USMCA. And what Trump did here is he said, all right, we are moving that in-house number from 62.5% up to 75%. And what the thought was here is that if we increase it from 62.5 up to 75, that's going to increase jobs in the United States and take away jobs that are made possible in Mexico by manufacturers like John Deere. Well, that might have been a good thought in his head starting off, but in actual application, that may not be the case, because you can require of a manufacturer that they increase to 75% in-house. However, in the face of automation and AI, that may not necessarily mean increased jobs in the United States. Also, baked into this is a remaining 25%. And if demand for John Deere products increases, what that could feasibly mean is that 25% of the parts, that production needs to increase, and that more jobs may need to be facilitated in other nations where they have established a facility. So, in other words, the USMCA does not guarantee that everything will be made in the United States, and still allows corporations to establish facilities elsewhere, right? Now, the interesting thing about this is that someone else is looking at establishing a manufacturing plant in Mexico. One has to wonder why there isn't this heat for Elon as well. Now, admittedly, at least it was reported in July, that Elon had placed the construction of this facility on hold until after the presidential election, because Trump said that he was going to impose a substantial tariff on all car production in Mexico. Now, this raises other questions about why, if this is the case, why is Elon trying to get buddy with Trump when this is seemingly right there in his face, and Trump does not seem willing to change his mind there? So is something else at play that Elon may or may not need protection from? We'll have to look into that. But in either case, why might creating jobs in Mexico be a good thing? Well, let's look at the numbers. In 2023, Mexico was the top trading partner with the United States. And between the two nations, there was $807 billion in trade that took place. That is larger than China. That is also larger than Canada. China came in at 576 billion. Canada came in at 782 billion. Also, as a part of the United States-Mexico-Canada trade agreement, Mexico agreed to overhaul its labor justice system. So this means that the United States has a vested interest in what takes place in the experience of those who are working in these facilities. And what did Mexico agree to? They agreed to fair labor disputes, and as well as making sure that laborers had rights in those facilities. And Mexico agreed to that to make sure that they were in compliance with the USMCA, as well as in good standing with the United States. So, not quite sure what the rah-rah here is all about when all parties involved are participating within the bounds that were set by the United States under Trump's administration. Right? Now, let's look at the other things that NAFTA and USMCA differ on. The minimum tariff increased from 7% to 10%. Now, you have to place this in conversation with what is taking place with these automotive parts, because there may be some jobs that did need to be created in the United States. And if more jobs need to be created, and if you're bumping it up to 75%, that means that the cost of the goods that are coming out of manufacturers like John Deere could go up, especially considering the fact that you have also bumped the tariff up by 3%. So when these two things collide, prices go up, consumers pay more. Where have we seen that before? I did a TikTok about tariffs here that you can check out more on as it relates to that, right? So what else is the difference between these two trade agreements? So we have the copyright increase from 50 years up to the life of the author plus 70 years, 75 years of 40 years of publication. The tariffs that were limited on farmers here in the United States, specifically as it relates to dairy and trading with Canada, have been lifted so they can freely trade with Canada as it relates to dairy without any tariffs being involved. However, farmers were still significantly impacted by Trump's trading war with China. So even though they were able to, get dairy over to Canada, that still did not supplement what happened with China, and they needed a bailout that was passed on to U.S. taxpayers. And what else took place here between these two agreements? So NAFTA had no sunset. There was no ending to it, right? It was just there. Whereas the USMCA does have a 16-year sunset. So the trade agreement that Trump put in place is in place for 16 years. Now, it is baked in that it can be reviewed every 6 years. So in 2026, we will be coming up on the first review. So this is the difference between the trade agreements, but this is also to help us understand that Trump is responsible for what John Deere is doing. And at the same time, having a healthy relationship with other nations is needed in order to facilitate the trade between the United States and Mexico. Mexico is actually one of the number one oil producers that the United States also relies on. That's from the State Department. So we do have to ask some questions about what is Donald Trump getting at here, and what is up with this type of vindictive prose that he is engaging in, and what it means that he will act like this as a president and not even abiding by the own terms of the contract that he puts in place. More to come on this. I'll see you next time. Peace.